Hello, Pastor Stuart here with another midweek Bible study video. Hope you're doing well on this very windy day here in Western North Carolina. Hope that you haven't blown away today, but are staying safe and secure from all wind advisory alarms. It's good to connect again as we continue reading through the book of Proverbs, and I do want to continue somewhat the topic that we talked about last week on words and the importance of our words and the importance of our speech. There is a lot of verses and passages in Proverbs that speak to that topic. So we read a few last week from chapter 12, and this week we're going to read a few from chapter 13 and chapter 15. The verses this week that show how important our words and our speech are. They show like the effects and the consequences or the blessings, depending on the kind of words that we let come out of our mouths. So we'll keep reading about that topic today as we jump into more verses in the book of Proverbs. First, we're going to read Proverbs chapter 13, verses 2 and 3. From the fruit of his lips, a man enjoys good things, but the unfaithful have a craving for violence. He who guards his lips guards his life, but he who speaks rashly will come to ruin. Very foreboding. Now, again, in these verses, like many of the verses in Proverbs we read, it lays out a contrast between two extremes, which are really two ends of a spectrum. And I don't want us to get the wrong idea. It's tempting when we read a good example and a bad example to say, well, I'm glad I'm not like those people, and kind of look down on the bad example. We don't want to do that. We don't want to say, dear God, thank you that I'm not as bad as those people who talk that way and live that way. Okay. When Proverbs gives us these two contrasts, it's to help us see the difference, and it gives a sense of the scale and the spectrum that we all fall on at different points. We all have good days and bad days, and we can all kind of give in to acting rashly, speaking rashly. And so when we have these two poles to think about, then it can help us kind of recognize or identify when we act or when we speak, and we can go, oh, that's a little closer to this end, or it's a little closer to the bad end of that spectrum, and I don't want to lean towards there. I want to pull it back over towards the good end. And again, like the verses we read last week showed us, these verses also say that having good speech, helpful speech, productive, building kind of speech, it helps us and it helps others. It's in everyone's best interest. So you don't have to think of using nice words as just being kind and respectful to other people. When we use good words and we have uplifting, positive, productive, honest, authentic speech, it's good for everyone. It's in our own best interests to guard our life, to enjoy good things. And last week we talked about good speech building up and how it constructs honest lives and helps other people realize what they need to hear about their lives, etc. So good speech helps us build our lives, and it also helps other people tend to their lives. At the same time, the contrast is bad speech hurts us and hurts others. It's tempting to think that just using negative words or harsh words, it only hurts other people's feelings. While that is true, and it's a good reason not to use them, like these verses remind us, the worse our speech gets, the worse our lives will get as well. It's going to hurt our own lives because it's not in our best interests to be jerks or to name call people or to tear other people down. We all do better when we all do better. So it's in our own personal best interest to build people up, and we can do that with our speech. Now, it is interesting that these verses here, they don't even need to talk about any kind of judgment. And in a lot of Old Testament verses and stories, there is a lot of divine judgment that is mentioned. But here, it's not necessary to mention any kind of outside judgment because, like verse 3 said, someone who speaks rashly too much brings their own ruin on themselves. And that's the truth. That's how poor speech hurts our own lives. We can think of it in even little, easy, obvious terms, like when you blurt out something and it just kind of comes right out of your mouth and you haven't thought about it and you're not kind of mindful of what you're saying. You just blurt it out and then you realize, I just stuck my foot square in my mouth, and you regret it. And maybe you're embarrassed, and maybe it causes problems in the person you're talking to, or whatever the conversation was about. If you blurt something out that is bad speech and you put your foot in your mouth, suddenly the conversation is about that. And you have to deal with the thing that you just said and how unhelpful or negative it was. And so the original issue doesn't even get dealt with or tended to at all, because suddenly you put your foot in your mouth, and that's all we're talking about now is your foot in your own mouth. So obviously, if you did that all the time, if you just spoke rashly all the time and just whatever kind of immediate thing popped into your head, and you just blurted it out, it would really ruin your relationships. People wouldn't feel at ease talking to you. You would say things to them that either you regretted later, or if a person was so immature that they were just speaking like that all the time, they might not even realize that they should regret it. They might not even feel bad about it. So if you let me bless and redeem some of those times you put your foot in your mouth. If you feel bad about that and you go, gosh, I should not have done that, I feel bad, then good, 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 good. Because you're not perfect, I'm not perfect, none of us are. That's going to happen to all of us sometimes. And the important thing is recognize it as soon as you can, and go back, tend to the relationship and say, that was my bad. It just came out there. I want to talk about it calmly and honestly, and you're important to me, or the issue is important, or whatever. Because when you just blurt it out, then it will come to ruin, as verse 3 says. But instead of doing that, speaking rashly, if you give yourself time to think about things, think about the situation, so that you can really respond the way that you want to respond. You can respond on purpose so that you don't regret it later and you don't feel like you put your foot in your mouth. Then you will be blessed, and you will, as verse 2 says, enjoy good things if you can guard your lips. So how do you do that realistically? Well, you might have heard like count to 10. Like if somebody says something, just kind of go, okay, 1, 2, just count to 10 in your head, maybe take a few deep breaths. And doing that slows down your reactivity. Because if we hear something that sets us off, then we just react, and we need some help kind of slowing down. So that old piece of advice to count to 10 before you say something is really, really good. And that will save you from blurting out things that you later regret and you wish that you hadn't said. So take time, think about it, be careful, and be intentional. Say things on purpose. Say what you want to say, not what you on impulse say impulsively. So that's on a smaller scale. Very normal slips that we all make, because we're all human and we try to guard our lips, like it says, but we're not perfect all the time. But if you want to get on a larger scale, then it starts to get even worse, because the speaking rashly might lead to ruin in a relationship or in a person's life. But on a larger scale, when it gets to rash speaking reacting, being impulsive. That kind of ruin can lead to the violence that verse 2 was talking about. And that's when it gets really bad. That bigger, farther into the spectrum, that's when violence can happen, like verse 2 mentioned. And if we want to see a recent, really obvious example of that, we can go back to the Capitol riot on January 6th. I think it's safe to say that no matter what you or anyone else's like political opinions are about any candidate or issue, like wherever you or anyone kind of fall on the political spectrum or opinions about any kind of laws or elections or anything like that, every level-headed person would say that invading the US Capitol with an angry mob is a rash, bad idea, you know? And what happened? Well, it led to violence, is what happened, just like these verses said that it would. So much violence that like 60 police officers were injured. One police officer was killed that day. So, real ramifications on a big scale and on a small scale. That's a kind of craving for violence that these verses want us to be aware of, to be aware of that far end of the spectrum. And again, not to say, oh, that's the bad people and we're the good people. It's not just a dichotomy. It's not just a this or that. Like, this is the spectrum that we can all fall in. So we really have to be mindful of what's going on. It really is in our own best interests to be thoughtful, to slow down, be calm, patient, not to speak rashly with our words. There are other verses in Proverbs as well that speak to that. If you're interested, you can look up verses like Proverbs 10:11, Proverbs 10:21, Proverbs 11:9, and a little bit Proverbs 20:19. So let's move on to our next passage is going to be chapter 15, verses 1 through 2. And this one is one of those familiar proverbs that will sound familiar to you. A gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. The tongue of the wise commends knowledge, but the mouth of the fool gushes folly. Now, these verses are perfect examples of great advice that is easy to remember. And I bet you might have remembered verse 1, a gentle answer turneth away wrath. Easy to remember. We all need to hear them, but really hard to practice because we are human and our spirit may be willing, but our flesh is weak. In this case, our mouth, our tongues are weak, and we give in to speech that stirs up anger, gushes folly, is not helpful, but harmful to others and to ourselves. But ironically, if you were to lay out those two choices, and if we were to pretend that people could choose one or the other outcome, even though, again, spectrum, if you laid out those two choices and said, okay, would you want to turn away wrath and commend knowledge, or would you want to stir up anger and gush folly? Which one? Which one do you want? Obviously, everybody would answer that they would choose the first ones, right? The good ones. That's what they would choose. That's what we would want compared to the other side. Except, again, we're human. Sometimes we're impulsive. We react too fast, and we put our foot into our mouths. It happens. Especially, it's very easy to happen if we if we get upset, or if we're hurt, or if we're offended, then our natural instinct is to react to anger with anger. Like if somebody starts yelling at us, then we just get defensive. We might start yelling back at them. Or if someone is negative to us, then we react with, negativity. That's very, unfortunately, it's very common that it's just that kind of immediate reaction that's hard. It's hard to stop ourselves from just reacting. So here's a simple, deep truth of being human. Hurt people hurt people. It's kind of like a bad cycle. People who get hurt, they then hurt other people because they react impulsively or rashly. They don't take the time to be calm and patient and say, what's going on around me? What's going on inside me? What am I feeling? I'm getting worked up. I notice I'm getting worked up. That's the key, noticing. I feel myself getting worked up. What's going on here? It's a cycle that we want to stop. So a wise person, mature person, notices if that cycle is going on, notices what's going on inside them and outside them, and doesn't let that cycle continue, but puts a stop to it. They don't just lash out when they feel bad or they hear something that they don't like. Usually lashing out never really helps anything, like no matter what the issue is. When we lash out in like anger and just overwhelming emotions or negativity, it's just not going to help whatever the situation is. So if we want to grow in wisdom, and Proverbs wants us to remember, grow on the inside. Everybody grows on the outside, gray hairs, but not everybody grows on the inside. So if we want to grow with wisdom on the inside, we need to exercise, get stronger our patience. We need to exercise more peace so that we then have that inner strength to pause long enough to realize what might help the situation and us, and then say that. I don't know, like if you've ever been like lifting something heavy, whether you're exercising or carrying or moving, and when you just can't hold it anymore, you just go blah, and you just drop it because your muscles have given out. Like that's the extent of the strength I have. I've been lifting this heavy thing, and now I'm spent. Boom, and you just drop it. And it might end up in something breaking, or if you're exercising, then just a wham, just a bam with the dumbbell on the floor because you've used all the strength you have. Same kind of thing with exercising patience and peace. The more we can exercise those peace muscles, the stronger we will get, so that we can kind of hold the situation a little longer, long enough to say, okay, what's going on here? This thing is here in the air. I'm going to decide where to put it. I'm going to decide what I will do, or where I will step, or what I will say, and not just blah, and not just drop it and have things break and have things shatter, and it makes it worse. So these verses that we've read today, they remind us the running theme of both today and of last week to remember that careful, thoughtful words help us and others, while on the other hand, careless and thoughtless words make life worse for ourselves and for others. That's why the words we use are so important. You really have to think about and evaluate the words that are saying. It takes real strength and real kind of mindfulness. It's not something that just kind of comes easy and natural as humans. If it did, then little children would all do that. If it came easy and natural for every human, then every little child would do it. But of course, we know that children are just whatever they're thinking and feeling. They just say it, and it's funny. The kids say the darndest things, and they broke that thing. They drew on the wall with permanent marker. That's how we start as humans, and as we grow, then we kind of learn a little more control and how to guard our lips, like our passage from chapter 13 said. It's not easy. It's not easy. It really is a mark of our growth and our maturity. Now, at some point in your life and in my life, something will go wrong, right? I think we all can admit that. At some point, something will go wrong. So go ahead and decide ahead of time how you will respond or what kind of words you might say. You can be general and vague, or you can kind of think of some specifics and go ahead and plan it out. Plan it out. If you can make a plan, like if this happens or bad thing happens, this is how I want to respond. Because it's easier to think that way when we're clear-headed, right? When we're not charged up in the moment, we can say, okay, if this should happen, here's how I want to respond. That way, when the moment hits and things are going down and you're emotional and your tongue is just wanting to jump out of your mouth, hopefully your brain can say, whoop, we've got a plan. Remember what we want to do. Remember what we want to say and how we want to respond. So good tips. Go ahead and start working on those tips. Count to 10 in the moment. And before the moment comes, think about it ahead of time. Think about how you want to be, how you want to talk. What kind of speech do you want to have? That will better set you up for patience and to demonstrate wisdom when you get into those moments that we all find ourselves in. So keep learning and keep growing. It takes hard work, but it's worth it. So I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.